What kind of future do you want for your community? In the last 50 years, a lot has changed in the global economy. We've lost sight of the agreements and relationships that allowed for growth, production, and investment in economically beneficial activities and infrastructure. Once written into law and policy, these agreements affected different Wisconsinites differently, giving rise to political and social disagreements within the state. In addition, little communication and compromise between decision makers in both the public and private sectors have worsened these divides. Because of the lack of shared priorities and understandings across party lines, we end up downplaying the severity of problems real Wisconsinites face on a daily basis and miss opportunities for positive change. In this video series, we'll explore 4 possible futures for the state of Wisconsin by asking and answering 2 central questions. Do decision makers agree on priorities? And is there a common purpose and understanding between decision makers? The 4 combinations of yes and no from these 2 questions will help us understand what will happen when leaders do and do not agree on what goals to achieve and the priority to carry out these goals. But these questions can be applied to many contexts where competing priorities exist. For example, a trucking company sees a business opportunity to deliver to new areas, but the company has been receiving complaints that deliveries within their current service area have been late. Decision makers at the company must agree on priorities and have a common purpose and understanding to decide which issue or issues to address and how to address them. No and no. When decision makers do not share priorities and do not have a common understanding, they fail to communicate. They work in isolation, and both public and private sectors receive inadequate support. For instance, government incentives prioritize some organizations and supply chains like large grocery stores and farms, but fail to support and spread the innovations produced by smaller stakeholders like local food producers and suppliers. As large grocery stores have incentives from the government to hire more workers and expand product lines, consumers get used to going to more convenient grocery stores. This ultimately hurts the local economy, as small local producers and suppliers no longer have ways to sell their product or compete against a larger grocery store. No matter the sector, food, manufacturing, healthcare, or others, our failure to share purpose, priorities, and understanding results in little hope and no interest in developing or having future-oriented goals, little to no contribution to the common good, the adoption of tools, goals, and measurements that are not in line with priorities, ineffective regulatory models that can punish local businesses and create unfair competitive environments, no integrated supply chain thinking to include independent and collaborative processes, no coordinated action across public and private sectors, jurisdictions, and organizational structures. Because of the lack of shared priorities and understanding, public and private sectors function independently. The lack of collaboration squashes any opportunities for creating policies that are sustainable and revenue generating for both the private and public sector. Also, law and policy are unequally enforced or not enforced at all, as public and private sectors rarely interact. In practice, this leads to a sense of government officials being out of touch with the true needs of their constituents, and, due to the lack of communication between government and industry, no effective or efficient avenue of feedback exists to motivate lawmakers to change or continue adopting goals that reflect their current priorities. In the end, communities feel unsupported by the government, and inequality and polarization exists across all urban and rural populations, public and private sectors of the economy, and throughout Wisconsin. No and yes. What happens when we answer no to the question, do decision makers agree on priorities? And yes to, is there a common purpose, understanding, and interest between decision makers? When decision makers do not agree on priorities, but do have a common goal or understanding, short-term goals are prioritized. Let's see how this plays out. Let's say the community and government understand the importance of keeping people fed, but the decision makers disagree on what should be prioritized. People disagree that local food can be used as a tool for economic development. For instance, food retail is a booming industry. Everyone buys food, and most people buy their food at large chain grocers. More than 1 million people in Wisconsin, about 20% of the state, receive more than $1 billion a year to ensure basic access to food. The vast majority of this is spent in grocery stores, which sell food shipped from across the country or world. In many communities, local food producers and suppliers are completely ignored as a solution to the problem of food insecurity. When we only focus on supporting supply chains from elsewhere, we miss opportunities for local economic activity that support businesses like small farms, local retailers, and young entrepreneurs. A range of opportunities are emerging to support local economies. such as apps that reward consumers for local purchases, expanding delivery options, and more. The results of local purchases encourage upwards of 70% more local activity than a large chain grocer. These local purchases fuel the Wisconsin economy and improve local businesses and communities. Main Street economies are essential to functioning communities. Local businesses create a sense of place and community for residents, making the communities that invest in these local businesses and producers better positioned to attract new and retaining residents. 10 years from now, if decision makers, public and private, share priorities and understanding, more of those $1 billion a year could be kept in our own state, creating businesses and jobs for Wisconsinites. The leak of revenue to outside systems is patched by a booming local economy, where dollars circulate in Wisconsin homes, businesses, and families. Yes and no. Now, let's see what happens when we answer yes to the question, do decision makers agree on priorities? And no to, is there a common purpose, understanding, and interest between decision makers? When decision makers do share priorities but do not have common understandings, it leads to a fragmented future that does not address the diverse needs in our state and country. For example, a person is in need of food but has had financial difficulties in recent months, so they seek out their community food pantry. There are plenty of canned soups and baked pastries at the food pantry, but no healthy fresh produce. The pantry on paper produces food security since it is sufficiently stocked, but the diverse health and cultural needs of the individual shoppers are not taken into account. Many local farmers have produce to donate, but laws restrict them from donating produce, or the infrastructure and supply chains simply do not exist. Similarly, the large grocery store in town has a lot of leftover food that could be donated, but because of the insufficient government incentives or inefficient regulation, it's less expensive to throw it all away. This leaves food pantry visitors without healthy, fresh produce that could have been obtained if there was a more cross-sector and community-involved collaboration. Healthier populations mean reduced healthcare costs. Restaurants, farmers, and grocery stores all share priorities and want to drop off excess food to food pantries, but without supply chains or enabling regulations, we lose money by adding to landfills and healthcare costs. A recent Harvey study indicates that unhealthy diets contribute to almost 20% of healthcare costs from heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. This costs the nation $50 billion annually. Because public health officials, local business owners, lawmakers, and other community stakeholders do not have a shared understanding of what actually goes on in the food pantry, new legislation or revisions to old legislation are not serving the community members to the greatest extent. When we miss the common purpose and understanding, only certain issues get addressed and the diverse needs of communities are ignored. By creating collaborative, thoughtful policy, we can address multiple needs within the community. In order to develop that common understanding, we need to observe testimonials, data, and science as objectively as possible to better understand the diverse realities Wisconsinites live. Yes and yes. When decision makers do agree on priorities and do have a common understanding of issues, we can create a productive future that generates opportunities for all stakeholders. To do this, public and private sector leaders need to collaborate. Additionally, elected officials must cross party lines to better develop common understandings. Collaboration distributes risk across sectors and stakeholders, ensuring small and larger stakeholders bear fair burdens and follow rules that are both fair and support innovation and opportunity. This collaboration also ensures that public and private stakeholders, both large and small, benefit from this new innovation and enhanced opportunity. For example, a well-run community garden can show us what a system with shared priorities and an interest in common goods and understanding looks like. In this system, there are shared future-oriented priorities and common understandings, providing common goods. In this example, the people of the community garden want to grow food for their families and improve food access in their community for years to come. Therefore, they created a garden with a variety of crops on a previously empty lot in town. This leads to an integrated supply chain that is inclusive of independent and interdependent processes. Thanks to a city council member who helped to revise policy on acceptable food donations in the community, the individuals who grow excess food decide to donate whatever produce is left to the community food bank. This then motivates the grocery store in town to also donate leftover produce, waste food as compost, and volunteer labor at the local food pantry since it has far more food and employees than it needs at any given time, thanks to previous hiring and important regulations. With the help of local government and community partners, the people of the community can take part in practices that promote soil longevity, youth are exposed to agricultural education, and food can be distributed to where it is needed the most. Additionally, there are no longer backups and gaps in the supply chain. The grocery store has a place for unused food to be sent, and the pantry has sufficient stock that reflects the community's needs. Of course, this hinges on the fact that government, industry, and community of all backgrounds work together to develop mutually beneficial systems and supply chains. Disagreements will happen, of course, but arguments should just be moments in good conversations. As we engage more diverse crowds in productive decision-making conversations, more creative ideas surface. And when we have coordination across public and private sectors, jurisdictions, and organizational structures, we have a bright future. Regulations, policies, institutions, and our daily choices have an impact on our current and future reality. We've explored 4 futures for Wisconsin through different collaborative styles, some leading to more desirable results than others. We all play a role in ensuring our future communities work in mutually beneficial systems, so cross-sector collaboration is essential to ensure all voices are heard. While individual stakeholders have the freedom to make their own choices, we can provide information that informs these choices in their impacts on the community. Everyone has different ideas of what the future of Wisconsin looks like and when the future takes place. By working across sectors, we can collaborate, align those goals, and work together to create a productive future for all. By collaborating, we are better equipped to hold each other and leaders accountable while being responsible to each other. What version of the community do you wish to see in the future? What would this mean to you? What will you do to get there?